I never thought I'd find myself driving through the winding roads of Hollow Creek, a town so small and remote that it barely existed on any map. The summer heat was relentless, and my old car struggled up the hills, but I was determined to reach the destination that had haunted my dreams for weeks now. It started with a message from a friend I hadn't spoken to in years. Anna and I had drifted apart after college, but her sudden and cryptic email piqued my interest. She wrote of an abandoned village hidden deep in the woods, a place she had discovered by chance and where she had stumbled upon something that terrified her. The email ended abruptly, with a plea for help and an address. And then, silence. Anna was never one for dramatics, so her message had a gravity that I couldn't ignore. I decided to take a few days off work and head to Hollow Creek to find out what had unsettled her so much. The town itself was a picture of decay. The main street was lined with shuttered shops, their once bright signs now faded and forgotten. As I drove through, I caught the wary glances of the few locals who bothered to look up. It was as if the town resented my intrusion, but I pressed on, following the directions Anna had given me. The road eventually turned into a dirt track, disappearing into a dense forest. The canopy overhead was so thick that it blocked out the sun, casting everything in a perpetual twilight. After what felt like an eternity, I reached a clearing. There it was, a cluster of dilapidated houses, huddled together as if sharing secrets. Stepping out of the car, I felt an overwhelming sense of unease. The air was heavy and still, and there was an unnatural silence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I called out for Anna, but my voice was swallowed by the trees. I approached the nearest house cautiously. It was in surprisingly good shape for something so neglected. The front door creaked ominously as I pushed it open, revealing a room thick with dust and neglect. Old furniture lay scattered, as if the occupants had left in a hurry. But something felt off. It was as if the house was waiting, holding its breath. I made my way through the ground floor, each step echoing in the emptiness. In the kitchen, I found a notebook, its pages filled with Anna's handwriting. She had been documenting her exploration of the village, noting strange occurrences, footsteps in the night, voices that whispered her name, and a presence that she felt but could never see. As I read, a floorboard creaked above me. I froze, the realization that I was not alone sinking in. Heart pounding, I crept up the stairs, each step a struggle between curiosity and the primal urge to flee. At the top, a narrow hallway stretched out, flanked by closed doors. The air was stifling, heavy with anticipation. I chose the first door on the left, pushing it open slowly. The room was dark, its only window boarded up. My eyes struggled to adjust, but I could make out a figure standing in the corner. "Anna," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure turned, and for a moment, I felt relief. But it wasn't Anna. It was a woman, her face obscured by shadows, her eyes fixated on me. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, but she remained silent, her presence more unsettling than any words could be. As I backed away, she stepped forward, the floorboards creaking beneath her feet. Panic surged through me, and I bolted from the room, slamming the door behind me. I raced down the hallway, throwing open doors in desperation, searching for Anna. But each room was empty, filled only with the ghosts of a forgotten past. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the oppressive silence was broken only by my ragged breaths. Finally, I reached the last door at the end of the hallway. It was slightly ajar, and I hesitated, fear and hope warring within me. Taking a deep breath, I pushed it open. The room was a stark contrast to the rest of the house. Sunlight streamed in through unboarded windows, and in the center stood a figure I recognized instantly. Anna. Relief washed over me as I called out her name, but she didn't respond. She stood motionless, staring out the window. "Anna, it's me," I said, stepping closer. But as I approached, I realized something was terribly wrong. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were fixed on something beyond my vision. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched her shoulder. She turned slowly, and I was met with a gaze that was both familiar and alien. Her lips parted, but the voice that emerged was not her own. "You shouldn't have come," it said, a chilling whisper that echoed in my mind. I staggered back, confusion and fear threatening to overwhelm me. Anna's expression shifted, a flicker of recognition breaking through the eerie calm. "Help me," she mouthed silently, before the other presence reasserted itself, shrouding her features in an unsettling calm. Desperate to save her, I pleaded, "Anna, fight it. We can leave together." But my words seemed to fall on deaf ears, the room growing colder with each passing second. Suddenly, the air was filled with a low, rhythmic chanting. It seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, a dark and ancient incantation that thrummed with power. Anna's body began to tremble, caught in the grip of whatever malevolent force had ensnared her. Driven by a surge of determination, I lunged forward, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the door. For a moment, she resisted, the battle raging within her. But then, with a cry that was both human and otherworldly, she broke free, collapsing into my arms. We fled the house, stumbling down the stairs and out into the clearing. The forest seemed to close around us, the shadows lengthening as if trying to reclaim what we had taken. But we didn't stop, driven by a primal need to escape the horrors that lurked within the village. As we reached my car, I glanced back, half expecting to see the mysterious woman watching us from the doorway. But the village was silent once more, its secrets retreating into the shadows. With Anna safely in the passenger seat, I started the engine and tore down the dirt track, leaving the village and its haunted past behind. As the trees thinned and the sunlight broke through, I felt a glimmer of hope. Anna remained silent beside me, her gaze distant but her presence a comfort. I knew the experience had changed her, but we had survived, and that was what mattered. The road ahead was uncertain, but as we left Hollow Creek behind, I knew one thing for sure: some places are best left forgotten, their secrets buried deep where no one can find them. But for now, we had escaped, and in that small victory, there was hope for a new beginning. I was well into my third day of driving across the country, the rhythmic hum of the wheels on the asphalt becoming a constant companion. The plan was simple: finish my work at a small office in Maine and visit a few friends and family along the East Coast. But as the miles stretched out and the endless landscape of Pennsylvania blurred by, I began to feel the weight of the journey. The trip was taking longer than expected, and every town I passed seemed smaller and more desolate than the last. It was late afternoon when the rain started. The sky turned a leaden gray, and within minutes, the steady drizzle had become a downpour. I was running low on fuel and had not seen a gas station in what felt like ages. My dashboard warning light flickered ominously, reminding me of my dwindling fuel supply. I knew I needed to find a station soon or risk being stranded in the middle of nowhere. As I rounded a bend in the road, I saw it, a small, weather-beaten gas station sign peeking through the dense foliage. It was barely visible, almost as if it had been swallowed by the encroaching trees. Relief washed over me, and I guided my car towards it, praying it would still be in operation. The station was tucked away, hidden behind a curtain of rain and mist. It had only 2 pumps and a tiny, dilapidated storefront that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. I pulled up to the nearest pump and got out, immediately drenched from head to toe. The rain pounded relentlessly, and I struggled to remove the fuel cap from my car, my hands slippery and cold. When I attempted to use my card at the pump, the screen was dead. I wiped the grime off it with my sleeve, but it remained stubbornly blank. Frustrated, I walked to the other pump, hoping it might work. It, too, was out of order. My frustration grew as I glanced around. The station seemed eerily quiet, and the only sound was the relentless drumming of the rain on the metal roof. Desperation drove me to the small shop beside the pumps. I could see a faint light flickering inside, promising some form of help or, at the very least, shelter from the storm. I hurried towards the entrance, the rain streaming down my face, and yanked on the door handle. The door creaked open with a groan, and I stepped inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, I knew something was wrong. The interior was a chaotic mess, shelves were overturned, products were strewn across the floor, and a musty odor permeated the air. The light that illuminated the shop came from a single, flickering bulb in the back, casting long, ominous shadows on the walls. I stood there for a few seconds, my heart pounding. The sense of unease was overwhelming. The shop had the appearance of a place that had been abandoned in a hurry. I quickly turned to leave, but as I stepped back outside into the storm, my blood ran cold. A figure stood by my car. They were drenched, their clothes clinging to their body, and they were peering intently into my vehicle. Panic surged through me as I called out, "Hey! What are you doing?" The figure turned towards me, their face obscured by the shadow of their hat. Before I could react, they looked past me, their gaze fixed on the storefront. I turned around to see another person emerging from the store, their appearance sending a shiver down my spine. This second individual had long, dark hair and a gaunt, sickly face that seemed almost otherworldly in the dim light. Without hesitation, he began running towards me, his eyes wide with a crazed intensity. I sprinted back to my car, my heart racing. The figure by my car backed away, but the one pursuing me showed no signs of slowing down. I fumbled with my car keys, desperately trying to get inside. The door was still ajar from when I had been trying to refuel, and I dove into the driver's seat. Just as I slammed the door shut and locked it, the pursuing figure reached my car. He tried to wrench the door open, his face pressed against the window, his breath fogging up the glass. I could hear the metallic screech of his attempts to break in. I slammed the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I spun the wheel and accelerated out of the station, the tires skidding on the wet pavement. In the rearview mirror, I saw the man standing by the pumps, staring after me, his face twisted in frustration. The rain continued to pelt down as I drove for what felt like an eternity. My mind raced with questions. Who were those people? What had happened at that gas station? My car sputtered and jolted as I drove, but I managed to make it to a small town a little while later. I pulled over and called for roadside assistance, the adrenaline still coursing through my veins. As I waited for help, I inspected my car and discovered deep scratches on the door, clear evidence of the man's attempts to get inside. When the tow truck arrived, I explained my ordeal, but the driver only shook his head. "That gas station's been out of business for years," he said. "It's a local legend, a place people say you should avoid." The next day, I contacted the local authorities. They were skeptical, and after checking the area, they confirmed that the gas station had indeed been closed for a decade. There were no records of recent activity or any disturbances reported. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something far more sinister than a malfunctioning fuel pump. The scratches on my car serve as a constant reminder of that night, and the abandoned gas station remains a chilling enigma. I drove past that area again, but the station was gone, as if it had never existed. Whether it was a figment of my imagination or a true brush with danger, I may never know. But one thing is certain, I will never forget the haunting presence of that forgotten rest stop. It was supposed to be a weekend of carefree adventure, a break from the monotonous routine of high school. The final bell had rung, and with the arrival of Memorial Day weekend, my friends and I were eager to embrace our last moments of freedom before graduation. That Friday, as the sun dipped below the horizon, we packed our gear and set off for Ravenwood, a ghost town that had haunted our curiosity for months. Ravenwood had become something of a legend among us, a place shrouded in mystery and whispered tales of eerie happenings. Officially, it was just another forgotten town swallowed by the ravages of time. Built in the late 1800s, it had once thrived before falling victim to a series of disasters, floods, fires, and eventually, a violent conflict that left it in ruins. What remained was a place where nature had taken over, reclaiming the land that humans once occupied. As we drove through the countryside, the landscape became increasingly desolate. The highway stretched out before us, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through fields of overgrown grass. The occasional flicker of a distant farmhouse offered little solace as darkness crept in, casting long shadows across the road. By the time we reached Ravenwood, it was nearly midnight, and the town lay in oppressive silence. The headlights of our car cut through the blackness, revealing crumbling buildings and streets choked with weeds. We parked beside what looked like a dilapidated general store, its once vibrant sign now barely visible under layers of grime. Stepping out into the cold night air, we shivered with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Let's check out the old theater first," I suggested, my voice barely above a whisper. The theater was one of the few structures still standing, its facade imposing even in its current state of decay. The others nodded in agreement, and we made our way towards it, our footsteps echoing ominously in the stillness. As we approached, the building loomed over us like a ghostly sentinel. Its once grand entrance was now a gaping maw, dark and unwelcoming. We fumbled with our flashlights, their weak beams slicing through the darkness but failing to illuminate much. The air was thick with the musty smell of rot and neglect, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to reverberate through the empty space. Inside, the theater was a realm of shadows and decay. Broken seats lay scattered, their cushions long since eaten away by time. The stage was a mass of splintered wood and tattered curtains, and the smell of mold was overpowering. We moved cautiously, our footsteps barely making a sound as we explored the remnants of what once might have been a vibrant place of entertainment. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a faint sound, a slow, deliberate thump from somewhere above us. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. I glanced at my friends, their faces pale and wide-eyed. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to rationalize the sound. It could have been anything, a settling beam, a shift in the structure. But as the thumps continued, growing louder and more rhythmic, our unease deepened. We decided to investigate, making our way towards a narrow staircase that led to the upper level. Each step we took seemed to amplify the noise, the thumps now accompanied by a soft scraping sound. My flashlight flickered as we reached the top, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The balcony was a desolate expanse of empty seats, the once opulent decor now reduced to faded patterns and cobwebs. We walked slowly, our eyes scanning the darkened corners for any sign of movement. The scraping sound grew more distinct, almost like a shuffling gait. My pulse quickened as we approached the edge of the balcony, where the sound seemed to originate. Then, we saw him. In the corner of the balcony, barely illuminated by our feeble lights, stood a figure. He was gaunt and unkempt, his clothes tattered and stained. His eyes, hollow and cold, fixed on us with an unsettling intensity. In his hand, he held a small, rusty pistol, its barrel glinting ominously in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a wave of panic wash over me. My friends and I stood frozen, unable to look away from the man whose presence seemed to drain the warmth from the room. For what felt like an eternity, there was only the sound of our ragged breathing and the man's steady, eerie gaze. "We need to leave," I whispered urgently to my friends. But before we could move, the man raised the gun, pointing it directly at us. His silence was deafening, each second stretching into an unbearable length. In a panic, Tristan bolted down the stairs, his footsteps a frantic blur against the creaking wood. I followed, my legs feeling like lead as I tried to keep up with the rising terror. Behind us, I could hear the man moving, the scraping sound growing louder as he pursued us. We burst out of the theater into the cold night air, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. We scrambled back to the car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life, and we sped away from Ravenwood, the town receding into the darkness behind us. The drive home was a blur of fear and adrenaline. We spoke little, each of us lost in our thoughts and the lingering horror of what we had encountered. As the miles passed, the tension slowly dissipated, replaced by a profound sense of relief and bewilderment. We never returned to Ravenwood. The encounter had left us shaken, and the once tantalizing mystery of the ghost town now seemed like a dangerous temptation best left unexplored. In the years that followed, the memory of that night remained vivid, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the forgotten corners of the world. Ravenwood had claimed its place in our lives as a haunting echo, a reminder of the thin line between curiosity and peril. And as we moved on from that weekend, we each carried with us the understanding that some mysteries are better left undiscovered.